Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of Charles University here at Campus Hybernska, which is a unique place established by Charles University and the municipality of Prague. My name is Tomáš Vokáč and I'm responsible for this building on behalf of Charles University, and I'm also a director of Charles University Endowment Fund. Welcome, our distinguished guests. I'm very pleased for our great cooperation with the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany. And also I'm very delighted that we can host this important event today, which is focusing on how to tackle the drought and all the consequences. And you know, currently in the Czech Republic, not today, unfortunately, but the days before, it was obvious that drought and everything around that, it's a great challenging issue for us, for our future. Allow me also to welcome Dr. Andreas Marx from Head of Climate Office for Central Germany and German Drone Monitor. Is it okay? Okay, so you can correct me then during the discussion. Also Professor Miroslav Trnka, who is the head of Czech Drought Monitor as well. Welcome. And last but not the least, ladies first, I'm sorry, Dr. Madeleine Davis, who is the head of Environmental Department of the organization People in Need. So welcome, and now I would like to ask Mr. Schmidt to welcome on behalf of Embassy of Germany. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Dobrý večer, dámy a pánovi. Jsem Martin Schmidt. Jsem už nový vedoucí ekonomiky, klimatu a vědy oddělení na velvyslanectví Spolkové republiky Německa. A těší mě být s vámi dnes. Byl to stoletím, po cíteným stoletím byl jsem Boy Scout. Tehdy byl zákon, když někdo na letní táboru nemá kabát, přišlo. A vypadá, že ten zákon existuje taky dnes, protože když organizujeme diskuse o suchosti, dešť. Promiňte, abych pokračoval v angličtinu. Thank you for your attention and indulgence for my Czech, but I would like to continue in the English language. I'm very delighted to have Mr. Marx and his colleague, Mr. Trnka, and also Mrs. Davis here to moderate this event. It's a very timely event because about drought, the media are full. You could easily find two prominent articles a couple of days ago. Who quote exactly? The Czech version, Mr. Trnka from Brno, and the German article, Mr. Marx from Leipzig on drought and the problems that presents. I can underwrite that instantly because we are renting a house with a garden. It seems also that discussing climate change and climate issues here in Czech Republic can be a challenge. But we as a German embassy, we try to do it in a matter-of-fact way, and we're grateful that Campus Hybernska is willing to host us. We are grateful for the cooperation, which is not just of today, but has a long-standing history. So thank you for that also. Thank you for you coming and being interested in this topic. And well, again, thanks to the lady and the gentleman on the podium. And I believe someone else will take the floor. No, that's not the case. Then I open the discussion, and hopefully we have a very interesting evening with lots of insight on the draft and what to about or against it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy not to be put on a spot and having to speak in German. So thank you so much to Martin Schmidt in welcoming us both in Czech and English, so I can stick it to English. I wanted to draw upon his words in one more way. I would like to thank the Charles University and the German Embassy for organizing this event. I'm very honored to be part of it. Also, because of that Murphy's Law that has been mentioned, I am sure that if this event did not take place, there would be no rain. And we really need the rain. So thank you. You have done us a great good. Please allow me to introduce one more time our guests, because it is a great honor to have these two renowned scientists here with us. So once again, Dr. Andreas Marx, the head of the Climate Office for Central Germany and German Drought Monitor at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig. Please join me in welcoming him. And our very own Professor Miroslav Trnka, the head of the Czech Drought Monitor Intersucho, a senior researcher at the Global Change Research Institute of the Academy of Sciences, and a full professor at the Mendel University in Brno. Please welcome Professor Trnka. And welcome to you all. We are very happy that you have decided to spend this afternoon with us. To set the scene a bit, I have a quote for you, and I'll make it clear at the end why I have actually chosen this quote. Global warming is no longer a distant threat, but a present reality. 2023, 2024, and 2025 were the hottest years in recorded human history, and the changing climate has increased the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. Droughts are longer lasting, heat waves more severe, rainfall and flooding heavier, and wildflowers more destructive, to name just a few. The planet's average global temperature today is 1.1 to 1.4 degrees warmer than in the pre-industrial period, and the evidence indicates that it is heating faster than at any point since the start of the available observational time series in the 1880s. Recent analyses suggest that global GDP per capita would be more than 20% higher today had no warming occurred between 1960 and 2019. Yet the world is on a trajectory towards warming of at least 2.8 degrees by 2000, under current policies, and around 2.5 degrees if all Paris Agreement policy commitments are delivered. Further loss of GDP is to be expected, given the warming is well over the target of 1.5 to 2 degrees set by the Paris Agreement, which was supposed to prevent further climate change, acceleration, and ecosystem tipping points. Those words were said last week by Philip R. Lane, member of the executive board of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. And I thought I will set the scene and get the depressing facts out of the way so we don't have to arrive at them during the discussion. I think it's very good to realize what frame we actually find ourselves in. And I would much prefer to spend the next hour of debating on what can be done. What can be done by such renowned scientists like we have here today, and what are the tools that they are developing and how those tools can be used by farmers, by governments, by municipalities, citizens like me or you. And despite the fact that, as was alluded, facts can be sometimes surprisingly controversial, set in certain countries like ours, occasionally, recently. I think we have a really good audience here that, as Martin Schmidt had mentioned, are people who go in a very matter-of-fact way about climate change and the way it needs to be treated, it needs to be discussed and talked about. So, now that's out of the way. I would love for both of our guests to give us an introduction because they're both working on quite similar projects, the drought monitors, apart from a lot of other things, as I have learned this afternoon. This is certainly not the only thing that they do, but it could be life-changing in the years to come. So, Andreas, I would like to ask you first, if you could please introduce to us the German drought monitor, and if you could also maybe shortly summarize, given that you are the first speaker, what is actually the definition of drought and what kind of droughts do we have? Because we all intuitively understand that drought is something where there's lack of water. But I think it's quite important to understand what levels we're dealing with. So the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here, for the invitation. Yeah, that's a really good question. What is drought? I can give you 1 hour explanation what it could be. I would say we have a definition from 1985, Wilhite and Glantz, who said drought in different sectors would need more than 30 different definitions. Therefore, it's not really an easy task to answer it. When we talk about drought, and in a German drought monitor, we're talking mainly about soil moisture drought. And drought is different from dryness. When we talk about drought, it's an anomaly. So an abnormal situation, usually if it is at a certain point within the year as dry as it would be only every 5 years, then a drought would start, and then you have different drought categories. Probably we can have the first picture now displayed. Then I could show you how it looks like. So this is the current situation in Germany. As you can see here on the left-hand side, this is the drought monitor situation currently for the uppermost maximum 2 meters. So in case there is 2 meters of soil, then it will be 2 meters. And you have different drought classes. You have this yellowish and red-brown colors. And then you have depending on your anomaly, you have a 5-year drought or 10, 20, 50-year drought. What we currently see, if you take a look at this picture on the left-hand side, I would call this an invisible drought. Because if you take a look outside, and as you said before, if it rains only once for 15 minutes and you have like grayish sky and cloudy weather, then people expect that a drought is over. But you may have a water deficit of 500 millimeters in your soil. 500 meters may be the precipitation amount of 1 year. Therefore, people often don't realize that a drought situation occurs, and this is especially true in winter time. And what you can see here is we had rainfall anomalies now for more than 8 months in most parts of Germany, which means that this total soil down to 2 meter depths and even deeper than that is abnormally dry. And one consequence is that the groundwater levels are way lower than they are usually. The second thing you see here in the middle part, this was for especially important for agriculture. So this uppermost 25 or 50 centimeters. This is here in the picture in the middle. And on the right hand side, this is not the anomaly, but this is the plant available water. So how many water is into the soil which can be used by plants. And what you may realize is that so the left-hand side and the picture in the middle shows the same, but in a different metric, and it looks quite different because you have this absolute amount of water on the right-hand side and the deviation of the normal in the middle. There you can see that drought and dryness is not automatically the same. It may be, especially in wintertime, quite wet, while you have an abnormal dry, meaning a drought situation. Setting the scene now, I wanted to say one more thing about drought monitoring. Because when we started to do this drought monitoring, so this is a German-wide simulation, we are able to do this since 2011. So in 15 years ago, we had all the information needed on the landscape, elevation model to build a hydrological model. We got meteorological data from the German Weather Service. So we're doing this now since 15 years. The drought monitor is operational since 2014. And when we started this, people called us and wrote emails stating there is no such thing as a drought in Germany. They told us clearly drought is something you will find in West Africa, but not in Central Europe, just because they didn't understand the concept. And that changed somewhat because in 2015, we had a drought year in Central Europe and also in Germany, where farmers were affected, where we had obviously effects on forests and on trees. And then it changed dramatically after 2018 when we had the big drought. But I think we're coming back to this later. In the last years, and this is the next picture, and I think I don't want to steal your time. So what we started to do in the past years was putting all our data into an online web information system, giving some more additional information about the length of the current drought. So this is the drought duration, to describe more the drought event, rather than only giving the soil moisture index with it as a drought index. And this is quite helpful for municipalities or for people from federal state agencies who now can directly access this data.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction. So, Mirek, now to you, if you would like to introduce us to the Czech Drought Monitor Intersucho, and perhaps you could also comment on the fact that the profiles that you measure within your project are slightly different, like you focus on the 100 centimeter layer and the 40 centimeter layer, while we see in Andreas's models that is 1.8 meters to 25 centimeters, and perhaps where that variation stems from. Thank you.
Okay, I haven't prepared a presentation, but if we can go to Intersucho website, we can quickly put it up. To the questions, we actually monitor soil moisture in 4 depths, 10, 40, 1 meter, 2 meters, so very similar. But we started Intersucho with just 2 depths, 40, which is basically critical for the root growth of most of the crops where most of the roots are, and 1 meter, which is sort of approximate for the seasonal water reserve. There is, other than that, I would also say that looking at the time frame, the time when Andreas started his work, we basically worked on the same problem for a number of years already, but it was only in 2012 where we get funds finally to purchase the necessary climate data from the Czech Weather Institute or the Czech Hydrometeorological Institute, so we could start the system. And again, we were operational from 2014, so there is no coordination but perfect time match. And we had a luck of having drought of 2014 to 2015, which really spun interest of farmers. And we do very similar things. We show the anomaly, in a very similar way, even though we haven't consulted that directly. That was independent development, but that's kind of obvious how you end up with visualizing these things. We tried multiple ways of showing it to municipalities, but if we can stay at the country level and go up to the map of the whole country, yes. And if you go slightly higher to the orange bar at the top, I think you need to just scroll a bit the monitor. Yes. Here you can see the intensity of drought. We have also other parameters, which if you click the third one from the left, nasycení půdy, if you can, that's exactly what Andrea has been showing. Again, you can see we have a country currently in the southeast and around the Prague, very dry. In the same time, in the highlands, we have slightly higher soil moisture, but it's unusually low for this time of the year. One of the reasons is that we have unseasonally early start of the vegetation season, and the plants are eating their water reserve way earlier than they should. But other things that when we think about drought, there are two parts that already Don Wilheid with Jim Glantz described in their paper. One part is it must be anomaly, it must be extreme, and it should have impacts. And the way we approach impacts are various. We looked, for example, at the condition of vegetation. So we take a satellite data and we look how green or brown the vegetation is. But we also go, for example, if you can go to the impacts on agriculture, on the dopady for zemědělství, about in the middle, what you can see, we have a map of individual regions, and if you download the map, you can actually see individual points of farmers that are reporting drought. And that's something that is, I would say, one of our major success over the years, that we managed to engage with farmers and foresters, but also with a lot of, I would say, yes, citizen science colleagues, just citizens that are reporting back every week their situation on the fields, mostly in the forest, but sometimes also in the gardens. And it's incredibly precise, given how easy it is to be done, and we get immediate feedback. One of the main advantages is that once we get, and I agree with Andreas, when we started drought monitoring, our farmers were sometimes furious. Not saying that the drought is not in the backyard, but on the contrary, they're saying, okay, we have dryness I've never seen, and you are not showing it on the map. And the big advantage of the drought impacts reporting is that it gives voice to those that really like to be heard. We process the data together with Monica and the team every week, and we get a very detailed picture what the situation looks like in agriculture. Farmers are writing us short reports, what they see, and it's incredibly helpful. Czech agrarian chambers, Czech Ministry of Agriculture can use it immediately as a feedback, and we found out it to be very helpful as a communication tool. Rather than allowing frustration to build, we allow the information to be heard, and heard directly from the people at the ground. We process the data and we put it on the website. It's anonymized. We don't put the names there, but we very well know who are the reporters. They have to go through a screening process. As an exchange, we provide them with a very detailed agrometeorological forecast for every day, which they like. So sometimes when they don't report and they don't get the forecast, they complain, which is interesting. And it's kind of, it works both ways. They are liking the product and they are giving something small back, which is at the end very valuable, because we can say at the end of the season how bad it was. And what the map is actually showing is what is the best estimate of farmers, how the crops might be damaged in the individual regions. And it's not so much precise in terms of exact percentages. It's of course very early on in the season, but it gives you the indication how worried the farmers are. They are always pessimistic. They are always worried. My father was a farmer. I'm from a farming family. I never saw him happy. he always complained about the weather. It was either too dry or too wet. No, when it was a perfect day, it only lasted a couple of hours. And all the farmers are like that. But their livelihood depend on it. And even though we might kind of have a laugh of that, it's serious. And the same goes for the forestry. So with foresters, we didn't have so much response. And again, like Andreas faced backlash for the winter drought, why we need the winter drought, even though it's important. Foresters don't consider drought to be a problem because their forests grow for 80 years. So seasonal drought doesn't mean much. Of course, it does do a lot. In our case, the bark beetle infestation we had both in Czech and Germany was a drought-driven event. It was nothing else than a drought phenomena represented through the increased occurrence of a bark beetle. But we managed to supplement people with the instruments. So we have about 220 sites where we monitor growth of about 600 trees every day. And we know how the trees are reacting, and we pretty well know how the forests are doing. And unfortunately, it's similar in the color. If we would go to the impact on the forestry, and we would need to go a bit deeper because we would have to download the map and see the real data for each of the regions. It shows the same picture. Trees are not growing, they are not happy, the farmers are not happy, and we still have a green landscape. So I would end up with a very simple quote, which says, when you ask what drought is, for people in a city, it's a nice weather. For people at the countryside, that's drought. And that's basically summarizes, to me, the best how we perceive it. In city, most people love drought because it's sunny, it's warm, no rain, no complications. In the countryside, rain is much more appreciated.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Perhaps the people in the city will not like drought as much later on when the heat waves will come. Nevertheless, you both mentioned agriculturalists and forestry industry, and I would like to stay with that, despite the fact that there are other stakeholders that we potentially may talk about. Because I noticed that after that 5-period drought that finished roughly in 2018, the Academy of Sciences has published an expert paper. It was in 2019, and it was a statement on what should actually be changed, what should happen, what have we learned from the drought. You both mentioned this drought in the past because it affected both of our countries. My question is, now that you cooperate with farmers or forestry workers, what do you see has potentially changed since the 2017-18 to 2026 when we're coming back to the issue of drought? Is it only that the farmers know better what awaits, or do they actually make changes? Do they change types of crops that they grow? They adjust the way they actually do their business? What is your experience?
For farmers, it's quite clear, and they knew before 2018 and before 2015 that water is a limiting factor. Therefore, we had a lot of research within the scientific domain, but also in the agency domain on the federal state level in Germany about ways to handle drought situations. Therefore, we know a lot about potential management, which results in keeping water into the soil. Plowing just means that you bring up wet soil to the surface, you increase the surface, you increase evaporation. Therefore, this is something. So you can do something in management when you don't plow that deep, but a little shallower. And this is only one of many examples for agricultural management. So what changed is the willingness for farmers to test out these things which have often not been necessary in the years before. The second thing which changed is so in Germany we had several consecutive drought years. So in 2018, 19, 20, those were 3 years where the whole area of northern Germany was affected by drought and by crop yield losses. Therefore, farmers realized, okay, this can be really a threat for my farm, and therefore they went for insurance solutions. And this is really what changed. We didn't really have something like a drought insurance, and now we have it all over Germany. Or even in the small farming insurances, you can have this drought insurance. And since this year, we're cooperating with an insurance company who want to use our drought monitor data to build an insurance model.
Very interesting. Minek, how do you work with the farmers, and what do they actually adapt from what you tell them?
Okay, I agree with Andreas. There is a lot of research also in the crops that can handle drought better, like, for example, millet or sorghum instead of maize in some of the regions. However, I always have to say and stress it. You mentioned before that we have an ongoing climate change, which sort of adding a pressure, because at least in Czech Republic we are seeing no change in precipitation. We have a longer growing season by about 1 month, and if I would be a farmer and I would stop plowing and I would really implement the techniques that we discuss, I'm able to save about 1 month, perhaps at the most 6 weeks of worth of precipitation, which can help me a lot in the crisis. But the climate signal is way stronger in most years. So the problem the farmers are facing, it's not in their hands anymore. They are coping with climate conditions that are way out of the usual limits. And it is extreme. It's sort of consecutive series of extreme events. If I look at one of our major basin in the Taya River, which is in the southeast of Czech Republic, that at the end of the river, at the Austrian border, the flow rate, annual sum of the flow rate was about 1,400 million, sort of 1.4 billion cubic meters of water per year in the periods 1961 to 1990. Today, it's slightly over 1 billion. So we lost about, let's say, 30% of the flow. Where it is? Well, it's evaporated. The rainfall is the same. There's no statistical change and it's not in the soil. It's basically plants are using it and evaporating it, and as a consequence, the water is becoming scarcer and scarcer, and there is a higher and higher competition for it. And we can see it. Farmers would love to have irrigation systems. Unfortunately, we as a country don't have water resources in a drought year to support the irrigation. We have enough water for a wet years to support farming with irrigation, but unfortunately it's not the way how the irrigation should work, right? So there has been a lot of debate after 2015. For example, there was a big push, increase the irrigation, and we as Academy of Sciences said, okay, that's a fair call, but let's first examine if we have water resources, and the analysis showed that we don't. But it still would help to have irrigation extended, because in some of the regions, even in the wet years, there is a lack of water, and it would improve the stability of yield. So farmers are working on it. Unfortunately, insurance has not been shown as a viable option, because if the insurance is done in a proper way, insurance company has to gain money. And if you count the losses of farmers during a drought, there is no way you can really gain the money in the changing climate, because we can probably successfully predict that a 50-year drought, using a reference period from 1960 to 2015, is becoming much more frequent. So the premiums paid by the farmers would have to be really high, and they are not willing or able to do it without help. But there are things that has changed after 2015. There is a legal framework for sort of combating drought events, both in operational and strategical way. There are discussion about the drinking water supplies, both for the industry and municipalities. So there's a lot of ongoing. There is a lot of adaptation to drought. But if you would ask me if there would come drought of 2015 to 2018, would we be better prepared? Yes, we would, but the impacts would still be there. And agriculture would be the most hit sector together with the forestry again, because the climate signal is basically so extreme that management options are relatively limited. And that's where I would end for now.
It brings me to a question: what other stakeholders do you work with? So clearly the agriculture and the forestry is an issue, and we might touch on that later. But who are your other stakeholders that are actually interested in using your data, and in what way they may use it?
First of all, I wanted to mention that for farmers, the situation in Germany is slightly different from what it is in the Czech Republic, because we have large parts of Germany with Atlantic climate, where you don't have this problems with drought and especially dryness and plant water stress. Therefore, we have several regions where we don't have this intensive drought problems. I think this makes the whole thing a little different. On the other hand side, we do have regions, especially near the Czech Republic in Saxonia and also Brandenburg, where we have sandy soils plus continental climate with really, that's not a perfect environment for doing agriculture. Therefore, we need something like a regional exchange, especially for this insurance situations. Other stakeholders we're working with is, I would say, there is no sector which doesn't somehow depend on water. And this is really what we learned when you take a look at drought damage after 2018. You had riverine transport, you even had tourism, which was affected, agriculture, forestry. We had energy production, cooling water, because drought in soil means that you likely have a low flow situation, and therefore there was no cooling. The cooling water demand for power plants could not be satisfied. So energy production, and that's I think these are the main sectors, and therefore a lot of companies and public stakeholders contacted us and wanted to work with us and use our data. And so especially after 2018, we started to share our data with federal state agencies, with national agencies who use the data for various kinds of things. So the drought monitor data is used to estimate forest fire damages or forest fire risk in the federal state of Baden-Württemberg, in the southwestern part of Germany. It has been used for forestry for the bark beetle risk assessment. We have federal states using it for their climate adaptation tools. And I think this is one of the strengths we have. It is a perfect tool for awareness raising. And this was really one thing which was important for me, myself personally, because I still have the impression that there is some people who don't really realize that drought is a threat which will be even more harmful in future times.
When we start about the economic impacts of drought, I agree with Andreas. There are very few areas that are untouched. Some areas are helped. Beverage production in the drought, of course, increases, or consumption increases. But on a more serious note, I would basically say that we should realize that drought is the extreme event, that one of the few that has been shown in the past that is able to bring down the governments. It doesn't usually happen after floods or major fires or earthquakes, but it happens after drought, because most of the other extreme events are relatively short-lived. We are well equipped to cope with those short-term shocks, because after the startling effect, usually the sort of helping mode kicks in, the solidarity kicks in, and country can recover relatively quickly if the governmental sort of and the societal structure is functioning well. And we've seen it both in floods in Germany, in Czech Republic, many other tragic events that we went through. We can cope well with these clearly defined events. And on top of it, for example, for flood and wind damage, there is insurance that actually pumps money from reserve funds to the economy. For drought, that's a very different story. Droughts are really extremes that are very difficult to be insured against for most sectors. It's very costly and it's unpredictable how long it's going to take. So it's one of the few extreme events that is in the long run able to decrease the country per capita GDP. And that's something we should remember. It also brings a lot of frustration in parts of the society. And of course, in some situation, it can lead to suffering and hunger even. So drought is not structural killer. It's something similar to heat waves. It's something that escapes the attention in the same time because it's very difficult to report on drought. And that's the reason why I agree with Andreas. The maps, glowing maps of German Drought Monitor or Intersucho are nice because it can visualize where the drought is. And while when you have flood, you do a picture, you do the motion, and it's clear that flood is there and it's causing a damage. With drought, it's much more tricky. It's even trickier with the heat waves. So that's one of the reasons why we are spending a lot of time on heat waves. These two events are closely related. And of course, drought affects drinking water, and that has a direct... If the drinking water is affected, then it's not only municipalities and individual people, but entire economy gets knocked down. As one of the things that our stakeholders are really keen to know what the drought situation is today, what is the forecast, but also what is the projection under the climate change. So I would end here and basically would say, yes, drought has a lot of impacts. Perhaps one of the things that we are missing is very difficult to quantify. With Monica led an effort to do a global drought impact monitoring, because that's something we are lacking. But even in our country, monitor and monetize the drought impacts is extremely difficult. If you have a flood, you very quickly have a damage cost associated with that. With drought, it's much more trickier. The estimates are widely ranging. But I had a chance to work with our colleagues at the Czech National Bank just across the street. They did a very careful analysis of the drought events of 2015 to 2018. They have access to all of their loans taken by all of the individual people. It's a study that has likely not going to be published anywhere. We well presented it only in sort of workshop setting, so I should not go out on the record. But frankly saying, they were able to see a stark difference between a normal year from a farmers taking loans for investment and high productivity, high efficiency, more gain in the long run, compared to a drought years where most of their loans were for just surviving. And if you are economist, you know that when you switch from development and investment into the future growth to a survival mode, you actually pay for these loans years in future. Sometimes it takes 10, 15 years to fully recover, compared with where you could be without drought. And this is silent cost of drought, which we don't see, we don't appreciate, and therefore we don't talk about it.
You've been working with your data for several years now, both in Germany and the Czech Republic. What do your data say in a short and maybe mid-term in terms of your forecasts, your predictions? And what should be the take-home message that the people here can carry with them in terms of what your data says?
Oh, that's again not so easy to answer. First of all, I wanted to say that if it comes to extreme events in Germany, we are used to floods and to storms. And they are of short term. So a flood event over a few days. Storm event usually only is less than a day, and this made it so complicated to explain what this drought is, because drought events we had in Germany in the past were a drought year in 1976 on a national scale, and then we had 2003, only the southern part of Germany, but we didn't have this long-lasting multi-year droughts from 2018 until 2024 in some parts of Germany over 7 years. So that was really exceptional, and people didn't realize that it is an extreme event. And I think I still think we should think about managing an extreme event rather than thinking about a new normal. And now I forgot the question.
The question was, what is your prediction and forecast based on the knowledge of your data?
It's not that simple, because so we did studies on climate impact, so how could droughts develop until the end of the century. But before answering this, I think it is important to state that we saw in the last years that we had economic losses in the order of, I think, 35 billion euros only in agriculture, forestry and industry in the years 2018 to 2020. Therefore, independently of how the climate changes and impacts droughts and drought consequences, we see a need for action, an adaptation to the current situation we have and to the extreme event we've been facing. In the climate simulations over Germany, so overall rainfall stays almost stable. A little more precipitation winter time, a little less precipitation, or as much precipitation as we had in the past in summer. And the summer situations will be the critical times, because if your precipitation stays the same, and you just said it, with increasing temperatures and heat waves, that means more water will be lost with evapotranspiration, which just means that your soils will dry out more often. And therefore what we expect is that drought situations in summertime, especially on the uppermost 50 centimeter of the soil, will affect especially people working in agricultural area.
Thank you, Andreas. And one extra question to you before we hand over the floor to Mirek. Do you have any predictions what this year's El Nino event is going to do with the drought? Some experts talk about the super El Nino. Is it something that we should take into account?
I don't know, but the only thing I can say is the farming lobby is organized quite well, and as you said, they're always afraid, and every year if there is a dry April or a dry May or whatever, if there is a two-week period with exceptional dryness, which just means it didn't rain, the farmers are afraid of drought, and they are quite well presented in the media. So we have a lot of reports and media attention for an upcoming drought year. And what we saw, if you take a closer look at the data on the drought data, no, we don't know in April if it's dry, or in May what crop yields will be. We just cannot forecast this. We even had situations last year and also in the year 2014 when the soils were exceptional dry in April and May, and we had above normal crop yield years. Therefore, I don't know. I think forecasting is really, really difficult, and I'm not sure if the super El Nino will have a big effect, because Europe is not a hotspot for this El Nino years.
I would agree fully with Andreas. It's very difficult to find any signal in the El Nino or ENSO circulation and the drought over Central Europe. We've done the study that sort of tried to solve that issue, and we didn't find any major influence. However, and I agree here with Andreas, last year, that was a perfect example. We had a very dry April, similar to this year regarding the soil moisture. Then we had a start of May that was dry. and we still had above average condition of vegetation, we still had a hydrological drought. It was a major one. And these things compound itself. So we had we came to this season with a hydrological drought still remaining from last year, and we have a second season where we sort of are running into the soil moisture deficit with persisting hydrological drought. So the outcome are going to be different. If they are going to be influenced by El Nino, I don't think so that much. On the other hand, I agree we can only have reasonable forecasts for next week soil moisture. There is, however, a lot of deficit accumulated in the soil that is quite unlikely that we get to normal levels anytime before, let's say, summer. But this is very inaccurate forecast. It's not a forecast, it's an estimate, educated guess with the data or statistical forecast.
What do you think is the future of your research? Where do you see the areas where you would like to expand into, and what applications do you think that might improve for the people who may want to use it?
So what we currently do is describing a current drought state. What we don't do is a description of drought events. And I think this is something which we just started with Friedrich Boeing, who just prepared information about the current drought duration of the running droughts. This is one thing we currently do. Closer collaboration with stakeholders is what we started, and we're a little jealous when we look to the Czech colleagues, because this, I think it's really the way it should be, having feedback from people from different sectors and including this feedback into the systems, because I think, as you said, there's a possibility to, no, I don't want to go further than that. This is one thing I would like to do. Secondly, what we have at UFZ and the social scientists groups is a scan for media reports on drought impacts. And this is a very nice way to get an overview what currently happens. And combining this media report information on impacts due to the current drought with the drought information we provide from this biophysical point of view, that would be really lovely. And this is one thing I really want to have to see in the coming years.
Thank you. Derek?
Okay. Yeah, I think, doing a bit of joke, I think the future is bright for drought, right? For giving the projections. We work on the drought impacts from a very beginning. Sometimes some meetings with farmers were really tense, as you can imagine. There are people very directly talking to you, and especially if they are not happy. But I have a support of the team, not only Monica, but a number of others, and we've spent hundreds of hours with farmers presenting and persuading. So there's been a number of years that went into this. However, I think it's well worth it. We would also love to have more understanding of drought impact. So that's the reason why Monica and the whole team led the effort that we call a Terra Drought. There is a small link in the Interdrought, which does what Andreas says, that we combine the biophysical aspect of drought, sort of soil moisture anomaly that we do globally, with a global view of a drought impacts taken from media reports and internet. We find it's quite exciting, and Monica made a wonderful job sort of trying to present it, because it really shows that we are not alone in drought situation, that where to learn, also predict where the drought might be causing a problems. It's not only economical issue, it's also a security issue in many cases. An ability to forecast drought is something that really drives us in a team. I think there is a way to forecast drought. We work on it. We're not yet able to say, okay, we crunch it, but we think there are methods that we could use to improve the way how we are in the medium term able to say, okay, is it going to be more likely a drought year or a wet year? Because, for example, for farming, but also for the water management, it has a major implication. Only if you would know a direction with some sort of uncertainty, that would be better than nothing. And especially with the changing climate, it's important. And the other things we are doing is really looking at the perspective. The drought that we are facing today might seem to be nothing to what our predecessors have faced. And what we try to do, we try to dig the historical data. We use the stable isotope data because tree rings are wonderful time capsules of past seasons where you can exactly know the tree ring is from the given year. And using a stable isotopes of oxygen and carbon, you can very well define conditions of a growing season. And from this analysis of oak tree rings, since the time the Caesar has been born in about 91 BC, up to 2018, we could track all the summer droughts that happen. And we could say that the combination of 4 or 5 year drought that we saw in between 2014 to 2018 has never been repeated before. So we would know in the long-term perspective, this is something unusual. The last time we came close was 1508, 1509, and nothing before. And that's interesting. And at the moment we are doing the same thing, but we added another 6,000 years. So I'm kind of, we've did all the analysis. It's now in the statistical part, in the statistical group. We're trying to try to understand how the drought has been changing over long term to give us a perspective. Yes, we are under climate change. We have a projection, but we also have a past. And it would be very helpful to realize that also droughts were coming in cycles that were not affected primarily by climate change. And it's important to understand them because they are superposed on the current trends. And that's the sort of development we are doing at the moment.
This is really interesting because from what you're saying, it seems that you don't only do research, but you actually get yourself involved in education or even advocacy activities when you actually talk to farmers or maybe some other stakeholders. I have a question for both of you. Do you think that scientists like yourselves should or could do more advocacy work where you actually talk to the policymakers and decision makers and influence those decisions?
So we're talking to decision makers, and so in Germany after 2018 we had a process of a national water dialogue, which then finally resulted in a national water strategy, which was published in 2023, and the drought monitor was one of the reasons for doing that exercise. Can we influence decisions? So what we can do as a scientist is provide a decision basis. And what we learned is that we don't have the mandate to make decisions, because decisions are made on the information we provide and a lot of other information pieces. And that's basically what I had to learn in the past 20 years working in this area. We can try to convince decision makers that it's an important topic, but we never know what happens, what decisions will be made. So practical for water management in Germany, what happened now is with this national water strategy and also the federal state strategies, a decision has been made that strengthening the water cycle on the long term is really important. And that's a good point. So taking care that more water can be kept in the landscape and then is available to be used. So the supply side is strengthened. One thing which didn't happen is realizing that droughts are extreme events, and extreme events should be managed. But that's complicated. So as droughts impact many sectors, they can occur everywhere. Yeah, this is really different from a flood event. it's difficult to manage it, and the willingness to cope with this is, I would say, almost not existent. And that's quite a bad situation after talking for 8 years about drought and damages, because wherever we go, so currently the cities and municipalities in Germany are forced to work on adaptation concepts. And wherever I go, when I talk to decision makers, they tell me drought is a big topic, but there is no way to cope with it in terms of managing the extreme event. And that's quite frustrating, I have to say.
Thank you. Mirek?
I would take it from a more hopeful side of, even though I'm sort of, I would say, pessimistic how much we can do, but no, the hopeful sign is that if we are able to build in resilience towards drought, we pretty much build resilience towards many other extreme events just by doing it and being able to think about these long-term threats, the drought and the long-term impacts the drought is having compared to floods or storms. So that's one part of the issue. Yes, it is a challenge. We can only inform some of the decisions. Also, the scientists don't have a truth. We don't really have the full objective final truth. We have the best guess at the moment. And we should present it with all the uncertainty and humility. In the same time, we know enough to inform the decision to be better than they are today. And that's, I think, it's our responsibility to go out and present these facts, or sort of the stance that the current scientific knowledge is bringing, without necessarily hoping to advocate for particular solution. I would leave it, and it should stay in the realm of politics. But the scientists should be, and always should be, outspoken about the risks, the perceived dangers they see, because that's why the society is funding the science. And also to come up with the solutions, if they are possible, or basically stating and providing explanation why certain sort of pathways, certain behavior, for example, towards the carbon emissions, will not in the long term help increase the drought resilience, and droughts are therefore coming back in more frequent form than before. So here I would say yes, let's do as much outreach as we can, and we try, and I think that's important. In the same time, be very honest with the policymakers that our knowledge is not the final truth. That's where we should strive. And yes, try to be clear with the public on what we know and what we don't know.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great line. We don't know the ultimate truth, but we know enough to give our opinion, which I think should be heard as well. In a minute, I'm going to ask our speakers for one final message that they would like to leave before we finish this first part of the debate. And the second part is about your questions. So please think about what you would like to ask Miroslav or Andreas from your own perspective and the problems that perhaps you are facing. And now we will give them a floor for their final word for this part. So what is it that we perhaps haven't touched on, but you would like to comment on, so that some sort of message can be left in this room or even taken home?
So staying, I would say, not getting in contact with stakeholders, but staying in contact with decision makers is the important part. In Germany, we have one clear, I have to say, problem, is really a problem, because there is no legal definition of a drought. And this is one of the next things we need to not just cope with, but find a solution for, whatever, because if you don't have a legal definition, it's hard to fight a drought. Yeah, that's really the one thing which needs to be solved in the coming years.
Thank you. Mirek?
Okay, I think we covered a lot of ground. I would basically say that one of the things that I've learned because of drought is to go beyond the borders of Czech Republic and also Europe. That for research within our group, we think drought is a global issue with the global consequences, and we can learn a lot from studying droughts in other regions to really understand it, similar like we do it with storms or earthquakes or other extreme or floods. We try to learn from the unfortunate events in other countries, and I think that's something we should work in Europe to strengthen, not only to improve our preparedness and resilience, but also being able to help when drought is sort of striking countries nearby or even more distant, because in current world, the drought can really affect the supply chain of car makers, even though you don't think it as a first guess, but really having a global awareness of impacts and sort of the risks that are associated is important. And I would probably leave it here.
Thank you. So now the Q&A part. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Thank you very much. Ludmila is my name. I will have 3 questions. I can then recap them, but they are easy, so that's fine. And thank you for being here. I could definitely listen for another 2 hours easily. Very interesting. My first question, you mentioned a lot about adaptation, and now talking about the farmers, because we talked about the farmers during this setup. How make it for them better when the drought comes, and less impactful, negatively impactful. But isn't it also the question about the farmers changing the whole perspective of doing the status quo they are doing, and not just being naive that just because we did it for the past 80 years, we will be able to do the same things in the same way for the next 80 years? Why did it come up to my mind is that, especially in the countries in the global south, you see a lot of more simplistic ways how to adapt, but mainly being diversification and using crops that is just not that needy when it comes to that, reforestation and similar things, which I maybe am just not knowledgeable enough how our farmers in Europe are doing it, but I can't hardly imagine that they are changing their whole business approach by changing the crops or building a forest in the middle of their field, to keep it simple, just an example. So isn't it time, or when will be the time that maybe we will have to think about really restructuring the whole chain of production from the very bottom? If that's the case, maybe not. Maybe you will tell me that's not the case. My second question would be, Mr. Marx mentioned that in Germany, the state already has some adaptation tools. So it sounded concrete. So in case you can mention concrete tools that the government is having, that would be really nice to see. And then the question for Mr. Trnka, whether our government has any adaptation tools as well, because you all both mentioned that it started to be a big discussion for the past 8 years. So they had 8 years, the governments had 8 years to provide concrete tools. Did they do it? If yes, if you can mention examples. And last but not least, that's only for Mr. Trnka, because Mr. Marx mentioned that German now I forgot the name for farmers. Yes, German farmers. German farmers have the space in the public, and they have the space in the media when something is happening or they are afraid it will happen, that they are quite loud in their voice in a positive way. So the question from Mr. Trnka, do our farmers have, the Czech farmers, also this voice and this space in the public debate, and especially towards the policymakers and government? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Probably can answer the first question. As far as I understood it, when will farmers adapt to? So in Germany, what I learned is there is no such thing as the farmers or the pharma sector, because it's very, very different kinds of groups. Organic farmers work way differently than conventional farmers. Potentially there are age effects. Younger farmers may be more open-minded than older farmers. And what we see in Germany is that there is a willingness to test out new things. And I would say there is a general willingness, but drought is not the only pressure on farmers. So you have EU legislation, you have national legislation, you have all the discussions about pesticides, you have discussions about costs, and therefore I think this limits farmers quite strongly in making decisions to go into a new direction, because they have to think about many things all the time, and this makes it quite complicated.
I would basically add that farming has always been like that. So it's been always a multiple problem, and drought, unfortunately, is not the only problem. You can have crops like sorghum that are more resilient to drought, but then you need to have a market for the crop. Or there is another option, then you can abandon the land, as happened in many countries across the European Union. So there are different scenarios what we can do. Frankly, and I would like to stress, in our climate conditions, if you have a forest, or if you have a farmland, or if you have an abandoned land, it's going to consume still approximately the same amount of water. It kind of makes it very challenging to come up with one single fits-for-all solution. And I think that where I see a hope, there are pockets of farmers that are trying to do new things, trying to, despite all of the difficulties, try to find a way how to continue with the farming. And there is always a way how to continue. You can extensify, you can cut on the, but it also has to be economical. And for the Czech farming, I would say the economic side is part of the problem. We are in very different situation compared to Germany, because our farms are large, with very few employees, and basically it also answers your question why our farmers are not as hard as those in Austria or Germany, but simply because there are not too many of them. The voting power is very limited, and of course it's also linked to the fact that our Prime Minister is one of the key figure in the agribusiness means that any discussion about farming is immediately turning to politics, and that doesn't help the farming as the whole subject. So it is, and we should name it. It's how it is. And for the farms to survive under the changed climate, it will require a lot of resilience, and I would say a lot of courage to do decisions that haven't been made. And farming is one of the businesses that always been traditional. You could rely on the experience of your parents when you farmed, or your predecessor as a chief agronomist. You cannot do it anymore. And 20 years ago, I've showed how the agroclimate regions have been shifting, and basically said, well, what it means is that the previous knowledge is not going to work. When I was doing my modeling PhD, and I went for the defense, one of the leading professors for malting barley production, read the paper. He was the head of the commission, and he said, well, we let you pass, Mirek, but you really make me uneasy, because you predict that at 2025 there's not going to be a malting barley produced in South Moravia, and perhaps it's going to be produced in Czech Moravian Highlands. And it was 2001. And he said, well, we spare you, and we will not dismiss you from the exam because we think your modeling is valid, but I don't think the result is correct. Unfortunately, 25 years later, I was right. But to say, I'm not saying with vindication. My friend and the professor of the time, he was the most knowledgeable person. He had 40 years of experience. And he would say, well, with all of my knowledge, this is not going to happen. And it happened actually 15 years. I was 10 years off the mark. So it happened 2015, when we had the highest quality malting barley in the Czech Moravian highlands, and we had none in the South Moravia. So the change is so fast. It's never been so fast over past several hundred years. And farmers are not coping simply because their system is so cumbersome. It's not easy to change, for example, from a cattle that is for dairy to cattle that is for meat. It's a several-year process. It's not well-paid business. So it comes to a point where I think we will have to think in the country and in the EU what we want to do with the agriculture, how we want the landscape to look, who we want to take over the care for the landscape, whether we want to be a farmers or we want to be a foresters. All of these will be a legitimate and very difficult discussions. But one thing we should never forget is that, yes, we can import chips and the cars and the iron ore. We can also import food, but it's very difficult to be dependent on food that is coming from different regions. We can increase the price of oil and we can stop driving cars for a while and we will probably survive. If we not being able to import a food for Europe in affordable price, it's going to be a very different game. And the agriculture always has this sort of stabilizing role. And I would end with a very simple example. Europe is frequently criticized for being a region where we are overproducing. But if you look at the overall balance of the food, Europe is one of the few regions that are providing food or commodities in the market without restrictions. We are not tagging any political or concessions that we want from the countries that we are trading with or we are helping with. And if we take that out, that's very important leverage that European Union has. And it's something that is stabilizing countries in the much wider belt than just, let's say, Middle East and Northern Africa. And we should always think about these things, because climate will not only change in Europe, it will change globally. And our studies are showing that dryness and the water scarcity is going to increase across most of the producing regions. That will make the future agriculture trade even more volatile than today. And in this world, to basically say, yes, we give up agriculture is, to my estimate, too risky.
And perhaps we could remind ourselves of the last question, which was that Andreas mentioned that there are already adaptation tools that the German government has. Maybe you could just mention a couple for an example, and then maybe I could comment on how the Czech Republic is doing.
I would say we have various different kinds of adaptation tools. So we have this the climate impact databases for the national level, but also for the federal state level. And currently they will be built up for the little more than, I think, 408 municipalities in Germany, because this forms the basis for adaptation strategies on this NUTS 3 level. On the other hand side, we have supporting tools to develop adaptation strategies for different layers. So a simple example is if you want to prepare for a heat wave, for heat stress, then there is a lot of information on the process, what municipalities should do in addressing this problem. And so in the German word is Leitfaden. I don't know. So there is a lot of climate impact information and ways how this adaptation process should look like.
Thank you. Now, Milek has the easy question of answering for the Czech Republic and what adaptation tools we have.
Yeah, it's easy. Well, we have quite a few, actually. There is, on the impact side, on sort of informing what to expect from a climate. We have, for example, a climrisk.eu website where for each cadastral unit you can look for the future, what the climate is going to look like. And again, this should inform the projects that are in investment, that are under consideration. Frankly, I would say adaptation is the responsibility of the companies and the society and the municipalities. So it's not a central and it's not centralized responsibility. It is basically if I'm buying a house now or trying to reconstruct it, I should take into consideration the climate change, and I should make a decision that is informed by data or the knowledge or a building code that sort of guides me through how to prepare for a changed climate. If I'm repairing a school, yes, in the past we tried to have windows that are facing southwest to have enough sunlight. It would kill our kids in 2050 to have a building like that in June. And we have to account for it. When we are doing investment into the buildings that will live 50, 80 years, it should be wise and it should be sort of proved towards the climate. That's basically what EU legislation requires for some of the projects to be done. And yes, we are doing it on the national level. It's not much reported, but also the banks, when they are considering the loans, they have to, by EU mandate, consider the viability of the plan under climate change. I'm not saying whether they are doing it with due diligence, but they have to at least consider it, which is a big step forward. And are we doing it enough on the sort of national adaptation planning? I would say there is a long way to go still. There are, of course, parts that are not done really well. We frequently fell in the trap that we look what we do, what could help us in the climate change, and then we put it in the plan, which is not exactly what the national adaptation plan should do. It should sort of be challenging. It should improve the state of the art. And you ask how we improved over the past drought events, quite a lot, especially in the water sector. The water sector has invested heavily into increased resilience. We have to admit there is not much sympathy for building new dams. We are not convinced as a society we need to increase the volumes of water we are storing for drought, not yet. But what has been achieved is that we at least connected most of the major water system. We backed up many water reserves. There are plans how to cope with the increasing water scarcity. Is it enough? In the face of the climate change, I think we have a long way to go. In my view, we cannot avoid increasing the stored volume of water or risking running with very low water reserves. That's basically a choice we have. It is not. It's something that is going to go into the public debate, and again, scientists should provide the informed opinion, but it's then a policy decision. And also, what we should realize that in these decisions, we should insist not only on basically listing pros and cons, but the potential consequences and who is going to be responsible. Because that's the ultimate test. If I'm saying, okay, let's postpone a building of the dam for another 50 years. If a major drought comes, who will bear the responsibility for not providing the water? And we should be very frank. If we make this decision as a democratic society, then be it. And let's hope it's sort of we will not have to cope with that. And it's on the society and all of us to decide which is the risk we are able to sort of go through.
Thank you. And let me maybe add that we all understand that it is perhaps best to do a little bit of hedge betting, because it doesn't usually work if a country or a continent invests only in a single solution. I remember about 7 years ago, one of our research institutions, WUMOP, has published a really interesting paper that if all the soil in the Czech Republic was healthy, it was able to retain 40% more moisture than it is at the moment, due to not climate change as much as the way the arable land is actually managed. And it makes a lot of sense to actually combine all these solutions, so then we arrive to some sort of agreeable compromise to everyone. Is there any last question? Because I will allow one more and then, okay, two more then. Ladies first and then Stepan.
Thank you. I have a question. If you collaborate somehow with technological companies, like, I don't know, maybe Vodafone or some IT companies, because as you have mentioned, that agriculture was done the same way, and our fathers, like, they knew what to do, and now everything is changing very fast. So what about using some IT solutions, Internet of Things or something like that, to be able to predict it more, like if you are using it, or to use it for making this agricultural process more climate independent, when the irrigation is done exactly at the moment when it should be done, and so on. So do you collaborate somehow with these companies or farmers to have this synergetic effect?
Thank you very much. You must start with Mirek because he's always second. So let's give him a floor first, and then Andreas can be wiser.
We do, with regards of, for example, precision agriculture, that's something that is done. Very good example of success story is the Czech hops producers that are able to somehow mitigate the current climate trends with provisioning of sufficient irrigation even in the very dry regions, and by precision irrigation systems that are quite sort of reliable and efficient with relatively a small amount of water, achieve quite significant stabilization of yields. Not increase so much, but at least the yields stop declining. What they cannot stop is the fall in the quality, because that's a temperature dependent and it's much harder to regulate. But also here they are innovating and changing the fields. They are going to locations where in 19th century it would kill the hops, but now in these fields the hops can prosper better than under the traditional locations. So this is one, and I would comment on the previous on studies that argue that yes, we should increase the health of the soil to illustrate the complexity. When we were doing this analysis based on our colleagues' sort of forecast that yes, we lost about 40% of water holding capacity of our soil, I realized one interesting thing. Imagine, and we talk about it with Andreas, that if you look over a time period, we are observing a decreasing soil moisture trend over the most of the Central Europe and Czech Republic. Logically, I would expect I am seeing a more low flows. But if I look at the sort of border of Czech and Saxony, and I look at the Elbe River and the long-term flows we have, there is no trend. Which is puzzling, right? Because we should have more water taken by plants, less soil moisture, and then I should see less water in the rivers. That would be my mental hydrological model. But data don't support that. And it was only then when I realized that the one possible explanation is that because we lost this 40% of the water holding capacity of soil, we make the runoff faster to the rivers. Then you can say, okay, with a less fertile soil, with a less water holding capacity, you are sort of maintaining the same river flows in the main rivers, while in the same time you are seeing a decrease of soil moisture. And then you can ask, what happens if you turn the clock back, if we could? And I say it's extremely difficult to increase the water holding capacity by 40%. We don't know how to do it, very simply. There's no easy solution. But if we could, and we run the models, the result was, yes, we would be able to decrease the agriculture drought a bit, but we would make the hydrological drought much worse. Because water is only one. You can consume it at the field by plants, or you can have it in the river, but not both in the same time. And that makes it much trickier than we think. I mean, the drought cannot be solved by improving the soils, simply because if drought is caused by the change of the weather patterns, this is not changing the overall outcome, because our experience is that the climate signal is way stronger than our management options. And it comes back to a question we started with. Climate change is a real problem, and it's not going to go away for foreseeable future. And for that reason, we have to be prepared for managing a drought as extreme events, because they are going to be here more often than before.
Thank you very much. Andreas?
We're not in contact with people doing precision farming, but as we provide our data for free, we know that there are many users, also private users, companies, and so usually when people write emails and ask about the data, how to interpret it, we get in touch with them, and then only then we know about them using the data. And in the agricultural area, we are aware of companies working in seed development. So if they have their testing plots, they have some observational data, but they don't have observational data on all of their plots. Therefore, they use the drought monitor data to check the drought conditions against the performance of their new seeds.
Thank you. Szczepana?
Szczepan Sadlacek, thank you very much for interesting debate. My question is, if a Prime Minister or Chancellor would come to you and ask, I've read your studies, we will have a problem in upcoming decades with drought, and I understand that. I would like to do something strategically. We still have some billions from EU funds. So what could be the big change for future to get more resilient? I know that there's no silver bullet, but what should be some big project to do? I don't know if it's build dams and think out of the box, like build desalination plants in Baltic Sea and water pipes. I don't know. What could be to really make change for future? Yeah, thank you very much.
So first of all, I will tell the Chancellor in Germany that he's a powerful man, but it's the national level is not the right level to address it. So the national level would be the right level to build a framework. But finally, I think droughts occur locally, and therefore you need to manage it on the city and municipality level in combination with, in Germany, the federal states, the NUTS 2 level. So you need this big umbrella on the national level, how to do it, and force the federal, state, and the municipality level to think about how to manage droughts. It's not so easy to do, but it's easy to develop this framework, because on a regional level, you need to decide, what does drought mean? What sectors are affected? What can I do if a drought appears? And a simple question is always so. In Germany, we had on this municipality level the water withdrawal bans, which means people were not allowed to pump groundwater over the summer month in the last years. They were not allowed to use riverine water directly, and that the problem was that this only affected private households. It was, from a legal point of view, almost impossible to restrict water withdrawal for industrial companies, and this is something which has to be discussed and decided on this NUTS 3 level, the municipal level, how to address this problem in future time in times when drought appears?
Okay, even though, it's a very unlikely scenario that is going to ever happen, but let's assume it does. Well, first of all, there are some strategic things, especially that since about 50% of water resources in our country are from the surface water, the other half is from the underground water resources, but these are also sometimes even more challenged by the climate change than the surface water reservoirs that you can at least monitor the level. In the underground water reservoirs, in some cases you really don't know what the aquifer is able to withstand. So I would argue we should do out-of-the-box thinking. First of all, let's assume that the drought is really unprecedented, and what should we do as a society, and what should be legally binding, and what would be the rules, so we don't have to make them in the time of crisis, so we would have agreement. That would be the first thing. And there are societies managing on even much less water than we have, so it's doable. It's just to be prepared. That would be the first thing, and probably the cheapest one. The second would be to go through the key sectors and really look under the stress test where we would need extra resources or new technologies, and decide what would be the most efficient way to do it. For companies, let's sort of invite them to invest in being more drought resilient, just not by supporting them directly, but just through not tax cuts, but just sort of allowing them to put these investment against their profit. If there is a profitable company, you want to keep it, just allow them to invest in the drought resilience. If we have resources, they are always scared, and yes, there are billions, but there are few. We had a beautiful example where we wasted opportunity when we had this blue saving program, where we invested in the water systems in the private households to decrease their water consumption. The overall, when I looked at where this program is distributed, it's pretty much everywhere, and it's pretty much in the affluent communities, more well-off people that can build their private house, and they have a lower water consumption. Was it really necessary to put the money in a distributed way? Shouldn't we put the money in the areas where we know there is no surface water reservoir and there is very limited underground water? If you channel the public money into these areas specifically to really decrease their dependency on the local water resources, you can do a great distance in increasing the resilience, and it would not cost billions. It would be just a wiser spending our money, not to please everyone, but really to solve the problem. And I would stop here and basically say we should identify where the problem is and try to fix the problem, not to please people. And that's a very tough policy, but as a scientist I can do it. I'm not a prime minister.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I have very last question before we all say goodbye and network for the next 10 minutes. And that is, because it hasn't been asked, do you two collaborate? And if not, would you like to?
No, and we would. Yeah, we have a common colleagues that sort of enable the collaboration, but we never really had a chance to meet directly. And yeah, it's going to be a pleasure to collaborate. I think that's one of the beauty of these events. And I would add, we have so much work that we simply don't have time to talk to each other, and that's a shame.
And therefore, I want to thank again the German Embassy for inviting us and bringing us together here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to both Charles University and German Embassy. Any final words?
Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a fascinating debate, hasn't it? I would like to thank the excellent speakers, the excellent moderator, of course the German Embassy and the Klimadialog, but also my colleagues from Campus Hybenská, our technicians, and I would like to invite you all for the small refreshment provided by the German Embassy. But let me also ask our kind speakers to add the signatures on the wall of fame. And thank you also, you were an excellent audience.
Thank you. Please join us in thanking Miroslav Trnka and Andreas.